So I just finished my felted clutch and I thought I'd share the process with you. I started by creating the fiber for the clutch using wool roving. I had a sheet of paper that was cut larger than the size of the clutch because the roving does shrink. So here I am pulling out tufts of roving, laying it out, making sure to overlap it. Once one row is finished, you lay out more roving going in the opposite direction. This is called shingling. You want to do about 4, maybe even 5 layers when you're creating a piece of felted fabric, just because I did because I want it to be nice and dense. So I guess depending on your thickness, but definitely no fewer than 2 layers. Once I was finished, I then placed my fibers on a garbage bag that I'd punched a bunch of holes into, took my paper out from underneath, and then started to saturate the fibers with water and soap. I didn't use any special soap, I just used whatever soap I had on hand. The goal here is to completely saturate the fibers and to kind of smash that water, agitate the fibers a little bit for the first 5 minutes. Agitation, heat, water, and soap is what creates the roving into felt. So this process is not one that goes by quickly and is also really, really wet. So here I am just kind of doing that smushing process for 5 minutes. Once the fabric is completely saturated or the fibers are saturated and it's been about 5 minutes of pressing, then you can start the actual felting. So for felting, that's when you start to agitate. And you want to do this kind of on a rough surface to help that process go a little bit faster. I'm using the rough surface of the table that I had outside. I've used things like car mats before, which has a great surface. You could also use an old washboard because, we all have those laying around. And so here's that process of just agitating, flipping it over, rubbing it some more. If the fiber tends to stick to your hand or stick to the surface that you are agitating it with, soap really helps. So that process is not a quick one. I even got a little impatient at one point and threw it in the washer machine and set it on a hot cycle. And I even used a pool noodle, but you can see now that it's a lot smaller. You can tell that the fibers are a lot more dense and it has felted. So once that was done, I was left with a fiber. Here I'd actually done some other wool roving to create the fiber of the pouch. When that was complete, I created a pattern for the clutch and just pinned it and cut it out. And I noticed it was still a little bit thick, so I steam ironed it, which helped it lay a lot more flat and further felted it. And then the needle felting began. I used wool roving. I use a little bit of water sometimes when I'm needle felting, only to help me create specific shapes. When it comes to circles, it's a lot easier to use a little bit of water and roll it around in your hand like a piece of clay. And then the stabbing begins. So I'm using a felting needle, just one. The stick is there to help keep my fingers from getting poked. This process is not a quick one. It does take a while, but I love doing it, so I don't mind how tedious this tends to be. To me, this is a lot like painting, which I love to do, and you're actually painting with fibers. The pink tool that you see on the right is another needle felting tool. It's one I've used a lot. It actually holds 3 needles, so it does a better job at doing larger areas of felting. It's made by Clover and available on Amazon. And the work just keeps going, but the possibilities are endless. And what I love about needle felting is if you stab something and you don't like the way that it looks, you can simply pull it out. How do you know when you're finished needle felting something? If the surface of what you're needle felting on is nice and flat, and when you turn it over to the back, if you can see kind of like a fuzzy version of what's on the front, then you know that you're finished needle felting. It also helps when you're all done to take a steam iron, flip it over to the back, just in case your iron does something funky, and steam iron the back. That'll further felt it. It'll further flatten the surface. And when I was complete, I actually didn't have a plan in mind. When I was complete, I decided to learn how to do a blanket stitch. This is going to be a clutch, so I wanted to have a handle on the back. I'm using embroidery floss that I've double over and knotted, and I'm using a blanket stitch. If you've never done a blanket stitch, which I hadn't, you are simply doing a little bit of a whip stitch going around to the other side, and then there's a little bit of a loop. I like to capture the loop with my finger, put my needle through the loop, and pull. That's a blanket stitch. And you just continue doing that stitch, keeping your stitches about the same distance apart. Capture the loop with your finger and pull. Piece of cake. When you're finished, then you simply tie it off as if you were sewing, hand sewing. I tried to keep my knots all in the back. This little doohickey that I'm working on right here is what will go in the back of my clutch. To attach it to the back of the clutch, I did a little bit of needle felting. I mean, it's 2 pieces of wool, so why not stab it? I did that because I am also going to stitch it, but I definitely needed to have something else secure it. And here I am doing that blanket stitch all up the sides, all around the flap. And done. Took a while, but I love the way it looks, and the process was so fun. Thanks, guys.